Welcome to another Thursday with ThirdPath webinar. We're so glad you're here today. I know I say that every Thursday webinar. That's because all of them are so darn awesome. Today's is going to be even better than you've ever heard before because I actually think today's topic is one of the most important topics that we could be addressing on these Thursday webinars. It's the idea of collective boundary setting. I'm going to put Jodi's picture back up in a second. She's going to help us talk about this. And the idea of boundary setting is not often talked about. It's actually something where you say to yourself, you know, if I want time for work and I want time for these other interests, whether that's children, elder care, hobbies, community involvement, grad school, whatever it is that you're trying to balance work and this other thing, you need to think about how much work you can take on so that you have time and energy for these other activities. And what you're going to hear today is that this is actually, probably the most important part of this concept. It turns out boundary setting actually helps us think smarter, work better. And I hope you hear story after story today about why that's true. However, I hope what you also hear today is that this is not easy to do. I'm an expert in this topic, and I'm going to be talking about how even for me, as an expert in a supportive organization, with supportive people around me, I find boundary setting something I feel like I fail more often than succeed in doing. And that's just the truth of it. I want to introduce Jodi Detjen. She's going to be helping us with the first part of the webinar. You might remember in this year's webinars, we've got 3 parts. One where we get some expert opinion about this concept. Then we get someone who's going to give us some real-time application of this concept. And then we have a very exciting live Q&A. That part's not recorded. You've got to be here to join us for that part. Although you can listen into these webinars on iTunes and see them on YouTube too. So Jodi, I am so glad you're here. Let me tell you why Jodi's here in particular. Jodi's here because she helped us write an amazing article. You'll see where you can get a copy of this article later in the webinar. And Jodi did this article in such a great way because what she helped us see is that there's all kinds of ways you can get smart about both flexibility and boundary setting. And it's the combination of those two that really help us as persons and as teams and as organizations really figure out an integrated approach to work and life more successfully. So Jodi, I can't thank you enough for the really amazing article you wrote about transformative flexibility. Any thoughts you want to share about the journey you've been on with me and ThirdPath and your own work, thinking about these issues about boundary setting and the importance of this topic?
I think for me, the biggest insight's been when we first started this work, God knows how long ago. I don't know how long we've known each other, Jessica.
But a long time.
A long time. But I used to think of flexibility as this tool that women needed in order to figure out how to manage this whole life. Now what I've come to see is that flexibility and then this balance between flexibility and capacity is actually a 21st century skill. And learning how to do this and learning how to boundary set is something that we need in our world in a big way because everybody's suffering from overwhelm. And without this skill, we're all starting to collapse. And so I've started to see this in a completely new strategic perspective rather than this micro benefits approach. So it's really a strategy.
Yeah. In fact, what I talk about is in a world where we don't have boundaries anymore, right? We could work anywhere all the time. And so it turns out learning about boundary setting in a world that sets no boundaries becomes especially important. And here's another way there's no boundaries. Men and women can do work and family. That means there's not even boundaries around kind of these old, outdated norms about who does what. And so you have to have boundaries at home too. I've learned a lot about this recently around elder care. That's the ultimate boundary setting experience because suddenly you need some care to take care of an aging parent. And the only way you're going to be able to have work and time for elder care is if you actually set some boundaries on the work side and the life side, get a team approach at work, team approach at home. So this is just a topic that is part of everything we do, like Jodi said. All right, let me give you a quick heads up about why I put this slide up, and then I want to get your thoughts, Jodi. All year long, we're looking at these 5 mandates for change that Anne Marie Slaughter suggested a number of years ago. They're so helpful. And as I mentioned, today's webinar is focusing on boundary setting, and that it really is at the core of how people live integrated lives. Let me give you a simple example. All right, say you have school-age children, and you actually want to, be home in the afternoon, a couple afternoons, to be in charge of your kids when they get off the school bus or whatever. That's this concept of win-win boundary setting. And so let's say you want to keep on working full time, but you want to be home by 3:30, so you want to leave the office at 3. Well, there's a couple ways you can handle that. One would be to say to your workplace, because it's a wonderful workplace, hey, those couple of hours in the afternoon where I'm leaving to be home with my kids, I'm going to do them later. Not when I'm with my kids. I'm going to do them later after the kids are asleep. Or maybe if I'm going to do them, I don't know, Saturday morning. But you're going to take that Tuesday and Thursday, couple of hours, so it's a total of like 4 hours, and you're going to do them at some other time. And the beauty of it is that maybe, let's pretend you have a job where part of your job is writing reports. Well, it turns out doing report writing between 9 and 11 at night is much more effective because you don't get interrupted. You sit down, your head is clear, you can knock it out so much faster. So you've set up this system where you leave work in time to really hang out and have fun with your kids, and then you get this much more effective report writing done quietly 2 nights a week. Everybody benefits. That's the win-win. Now, there's all kinds of ways it doesn't work that way, but that's what we're getting at. Jodi, what do you think about that? Is that a good example? And what are some of the ways this gets messed up?
Yeah, I like that example. I want to add one other thing. I think a lot of times what ends up happening is that people who say I need to leave at 3:15 to pick up my kids look at that as flexibility, and I look at that as it can also feel rigid, because what if you have a situation where you need to be there till 5? So maybe there's a way that you can flex on that, and maybe, from a capacity perspective, you work great between 9 and 11, but occasionally you need to be there. And so having some flexibility around what that looks like and realizing that it's not the same every single solitary day. It depends on what's going on. It depends on what's going on at home. It depends on what's going on at work. And so having the idea that when you have the ability to choose when and where to work and how to work and your capacity, that means that it's not rigid. It changes. Life shows up. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. They create these rules and boundaries between work and life, and I don't think it's effective. But people do that because it's an artificial boundary, right? If we set this rigid at 3 o'clock, I'm no longer working. Now I don't have to worry about boundary setting. The boundary is set for me. And I think what we're seeing in the workplaces is that work needs people that can own the boundaries and realize, actually, I have a priority, so let me set it in a different way. Yeah. That's the skill.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So right from the get-go, you guys listening in today can hear this is going to be an amazing conversation. The time's going to fly by. I got to keep an eye on the clock. So what I hear you saying, Jodi, is so important. It's a phrase I use all the time. Firm but flexible.
Yes.
And so, because what happens if you're too, is there a counterpoint? When people are too flexible, what can happen too? What's the downside there?
So in my experience, what happens when people are too flexible is that then they don't prioritize well. So for example, that whatever the latest fire is, that's what they'll drop everything and go to the latest fire. And so even though they might have had planned an incredible outing with their family, or they're spending an hour with their mother, or they're just spending an hour doing something for themselves, somebody else's priority comes along and they're like, oh, I got to do that. And so then they burn out because they actually fail to realize that boundary setting means you've got to include your needs as well. That your needs, not your kids' needs, not your family's needs, not your work needs, nobody else's needs, just yours. Those are equally important to everybody else's. And so boundary setting means including that too.
Yeah, excellent. And a simple, another example of boundary setting, and you can, I'm pretty sure on the free resources page of our website, there's a little document you can download that's a vacation checklist. Vacations are a great example of the opportunity of win-win boundary setting. And again, depending on the type of organization you work in, the type of work you do, you can set more and more effective win-win boundaries around vacations. For me, it means completely turning off as much as possible for that whole week. But here's the win-win part of it. What I start doing 2 weeks before I even leave for vacation is to start saying, okay, well, what do I got to do this week and next week to make sure I can get out the door in time? Who do I need to talk to soon? Who can I talk to after vacation? Who do I have to talk to in between? I do a lot of planning to make sure that I can get out that door and really turn things off. I know other people who are really progressive leaders I work with. The best answer for them is to just do a quick email check every morning on vacation, but otherwise they turn off work the whole time. The point being, we can do innovation better because we actually have some time to recharge, re-energize, reinvigorate, breathe, laugh, have some fun. And so this is a really important dimension, being able to think about, how do I get my work done well in the time that I have, be firm but flexible, and then I have time for life. Any other thoughts before I go on to the next slide, Jodi?
I just think that what you're saying is so critical. And I think everybody says, oh, we want to be innovative. And then what they do is they put controls around that. Nope, you got to be here then. Nope, you can't be on social media. Nope, you can't have time for your family. And so nobody is creative when they're bounded. Nobody's creative when they're told they have to live within these rule bases. And so innovation requires flexible thinking.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And so we're going to inspire you, because that's what we have next, is to talk about some pretty amazing people we've been working with at ThirdPath Institute. You'll be hearing more about them in a second. But in general, when I started looking at these progressive professionals who have moved into leadership jobs, so they worked in organizations just like yours, folks. They weren't in these super supportive workplaces. Many of them started out in organizations that really kind of were very demanding, but they started negotiating to have some sort of flexibility and to look for those win-win boundaries. So these professionals we were working with were getting very smart about flexibility and capacity management. How much can I really get done given the time I have available for work? How can I do an excellent job at work given the time I have available? Here's the exciting news, and again, we're going to tell you more about this in a second. Then they went on to become team managers, team leaders, and it turns out, in order to be a really successful integrated leader, a whole life leader, you actually, again, you need to rely on a team to help you get your work done. And because you need to rely on that team, you actually support them to have flexibility. We've been working with these leaders long enough that now some have gone on to some pretty impressive positions, including Michelle, who we're going to talk about in a second. She's a CFO, and she's now thinking about these issues at an organizational level. How can we do flexibility that supports people to have time and energy for their lives? And it turns out part of that comes from thinking smart about capacity management. I know we're going to tell some great stories in a second, but what would you like to add first before we go there?
I think the cool thing about this is that the way you framed it is it's a skill. So many people think, oh no, flexibility is something that, again, benefit from HR. Nah, it's a skill. It's a skill in negotiation, and it's a skill that we are teaching our children. It's a skill that we use every day when we go to the grocery store, when we go, whatever. So when we think of it as a skill, it's doable, it's accessible, and anybody can do it. We just have to learn how.
Yeah. Well, good. Let's give them some more inspirational ideas to get them their juices flowing, their innovation going. All right, I'm going to tell you a quick story about Michelle. She's now a CFO of a really amazing growing organization of banks. So she's using this skill over and over again as their organization manages this growth. And it's a skill she learned way, way, way back when her first child became old enough to start having summers off. And she looked ahead and said, oh my goodness, for the rest of my two daughters' lives, they're going to have summers off. And Michelle, grew up having a really relaxed summer experience myself, and I would like to have this for my daughters. So, and again, folks, she worked in an organization just like yours, but she got her courage up and she's negotiated to basically work a flex year schedule where she took about 2 months off in the summers to basically spend with her two daughters. And then busy season, because she was a public accountant, She worked kind of longer hours, and then the rest of the year kind of looked like a kind of standard week. Her husband had actually changed his job around so he could be in charge of the kids after school. She did mornings, and so they had this lovely schedule they set up where they really said, how do we do work in a way where we have time for the things that we care about at home and energy for those things? And it took some courage to ask for those changes. And she did it with a team at home. Rob and her really worked together to think about those family needs. Again, we've got great stories that are going to come up next. Jodi, anything you want to add about this one, though?
I think what I loved about Michelle's story and in talking with her is this whole idea of, again, you see the flexibility over the course. So life changes, right? Her kids got older. So as her kids got older, she had more capacity so she could shift her schedule again. And so it wasn't like, here's what I'm going to be doing forever. No, it's like, here's what I'm going to be doing while the kids are young. Here's what I'm going to be doing when the kids are in school. Here's what I'm going to do when they're teenagers. Here's what I'm going to do when they're gone. She totally adapted with the situation at life. It's such an open mindset approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a big message too. These things keep on changing, and so we need to keep on applying the process. In fact, you listening in today, we will be showing you that process, because it turns out there really is a fairly straightforward thing we all need to do over and over again as we keep on following this integrated approach. So who are these other people? What's a couple of highlights around how they thought differently around setting and looking for win-win boundaries? Tell me, Jodi.
So one of the cool things, like I love Will, who's in the middle column. So he's sort of like, he's got a lot of team support around capacity management, and he's got the whole organization support around flexibility. So here's a guy a man who said, I want to be part of my kid's life, so I'm going to negotiate a 4-day work week when my kids are born. And then he decides, like, at one point, I'm going to take a 5-month sabbatical with my kids and tour the country. Like, these are courageous asks, and that's negotiation. Like, I look at Michelle and I look at Will and I go, these people start negotiating in the deep end. Like, I would not have started there. And here they did. They asked the big questions right up front, and they got here's the thing, both of them got yeses.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean if you don't get a yes initially that you should say, oh, my organization's awful. No, you go back, you think about, what are my organization's needs? And you frame the ask in relation to the organization's needs. You say, here's what I'm going to work better if I do this. I'll give you so much in those 4 days. You will not miss me the 5th. One of the best things I love about Michelle is that she said, she was able to exceed her goals based on this.
Yeah.
And so all these assumptions that people are worried about, she addressed up front in the ask. And so that's the key. You don't just say, I need this for me. No, the organization's going to win too.
Yeah, and here's what I told one lie. I'm watching the clock, and I'm not going to have time to have Jodi tell you the rest of the stories. But look what you can do. You can get a copy of this article and all their stories sent to you. And we will inspire you that change is possible. And Jodi actually has a great kind of 10-step thing you can do to kind of put these ideas into action. The one last thing I wanted to underscore that Jodi said and get her to talk more about. So is it true? I'm hearing you say that they actually improved their work. And why? How could that be possible? How could boundary setting improve the work?
I think when we look at the research on motivation, what we see is that people love it when they have autonomy and voice in how they get their work done. And they also feel like if they have a purpose, if they're aligned with what the value that they're bringing. And so when you stop controlling the micro, how they get it done, and you let people do it, and you give them clear goals and say, we're going to measure those goals, people rise to it. They want that. Of course, if you've hired well, if you haven't hired well, that's a whole other story. But if you've hired well, people will rise to this. And what ends up happening is they have more energy because they're not worrying about, oh my God, I got to watch the clock, or they're going to come ding me. They're going to walk around the office to see if I'm still there. No, they're sitting there going, they trust that I'm going to do my work and I'm going to live up to that. Yeah. And so guess what happens? People have more energy and focus.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's one other way. We're going to talk about some of the challenges later. People are afraid to make these changes because, will it mean it impacts my career? We're going to come back to that later. But here's the other truth. We also live in a world where we all are doing too much. Yeah. Mostly too much at work, honestly, in my humble opinion, but sometimes too much on life side too, And when you're doing too much, you don't actually do it well. And so when you ask the hard question, what can I really handle? And you prioritize and you cut back and you go at a better pace, you actually do better work. But I want to underscore, this is not easy. We're not even going to be able to talk about this slide too much because, hey, I didn't do a good job with boundary setting. But hey, the point being that if we aren't careful and we let just work take over our lives, which too many organizations are letting us do, we just don't have enough time and energy for us to recharge, and we're just kind of on a gerbil wheel, and it's not going to be our creative, most focused, thoughtful selves. If we get time at the end, we'll come back to this. I just want to say, I still fail at this. This is hard, but I've got some processes I use to keep getting smarter about what can I really handle. Anything you want to add real quickly about this slide, Jodi?
So I think for me, it's hard for me too. I love having my hands in a lot of different things, and I get a lot of joy out of that. But I've also found that by me dropping the stuff that drains me, I actually can increase my capacity without really spending more time on something. So, and that's a constant process too, because something that fulfilled me 5 years ago does no longer fulfills me. So it's about this regular checking in.
Yeah.
And say, okay, right now, what would work the best?
Yeah, wonderful. In fact, you're reminding me of a Michelle example where she used to think about her clients. She had time and space to think about her clients, and she would actually start saying, this is kind of a slow pay, or this is a very demanding client, but not a great, reliable client. So she would make some choices around which clients she worked with. And if you're in a constant firefighting mode, you don't have time to reflect that way. So again, it seems counterintuitive, but when we create a little bit more space in our lives, we actually get smarter about how we get our work done. So where are we going next? All right, we're going to have Jennifer Fraone join us and talk a little bit about how does some of this apply? Boundary setting, how do we apply it in our organizations, in our lives? So we're going to get concrete, and I've asked Jennifer to help us do that. Jennifer, I'm so glad you're here today too. You've been listening to a bunch. You might be bubbling with one or two thoughts you want to share before we go next. Please tell us.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for inviting me to participate, and with Jodi as well. If you could have seen me visually, you would know that I was nodding my head pretty much the entire time you were having a conversation. It resonates with me both on a personal and a professional level. One of the things that, when we think about boundaries, there are a number of different types of boundaries that we have, and therefore that we can use tactics to help improve our boundaries. A professor from Penn State named Glenn Kreiner won the Rosabeth Moss Cantor Award from our center and Purdue a couple years ago on his work around boundary setting. And he identified 4 different types of boundaries: physical, communicative, behavioral, and temporal, or those having to do with time. And if we have time in this session, I can give you an example of each of those if that would be helpful.
Great, wonderful, good to think about. We will circle back to that. I've written it down. Super. All right. So what we want to think about is given your job, you've met some pretty impressive leaders, pretty impressive organizations. I've got my fingers crossed that maybe you've seen maybe it's just a team, maybe it's a whole organization. But what we're trying to get Jennifer to think about with us is the how. How do leaders, teams, organizations think smarter about boundaries? And I actually asked Jennifer to share a little bit about how she does this herself as well. So have you had any success seeing some teams out there, organizations thinking smart about this, Jennifer?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that it is a constant evolution for both teams and organizations to think about how to do this well. As technology becomes pervasive and actually invasive in our lives, we constantly have to kind of retool this. But one of the projects I did a couple of years ago was working on a flexibility training training with a mid-sized accounting firm, and we trained managers in 3 different departments and then looked to see if that had an impact. And so one of the exercises that we asked them to do with their team was to have a discussion with their team about their work-life needs. Put those right on the table. What we had really found in years past and looking at many organizations is that flexibility is often discussed under the table. It's between one manager and the employee. It's an accommodation maybe for a superstar or for someone who needs a little help along the time, but it's generally not discussed in the group setting where people can potentially offer to help each other, increase their empathy for each other's situations, improve the teamwork as they, strive to be better co-workers to each other, and then figure out together if there's more support needed to get the job done, who can help with that. So that exercise that the managers were assigned to do was to go back and at their next team meeting, talk about, what's coming up in people's lives and how can the team support each other as they're working to complete these goals in the workplace.
Oh, what a great point. There's so many good points, actually. One is transparency, and the other is getting it to be discussed as a whole team. And to, again, this kind of what I call a work-life outlook, looking ahead both on the work side and the life side and thinking about, there are peaks and valleys around how much work we need to do. Jodi was talking about that. There's also peaks and valleys on the life side. And so a manager is working with their team to think about how do we think ahead, what's coming down the path on the work and life side so we can really increase the odds of doing this, both sides of the equation really, really effectively. That's terrific. And, we're going to get to your story in a second, too, because a team at work is critical. And, the whole idea that somebody else can kind of pick up if somebody else needs to leave. Again, I'll bring back to elder care. Suddenly, there's a change. You need to go and help a parent. That's been happening in my life this year. And there's been ways where I've been able to rely on other team members to make it all work together. A team at home also helps us make it work. Going back to Michelle's story, when she had busy season, Rob really stepped up and did more on the home front. She had a team at work and a team at home that really made it work. There might be another story you want to share on the idea of a team or a leader or an organization thinking smart about these issues. Tell us, Jennifer.
Yeah, well, I do think when you're talking about respite and recovery time, that little teeny green sliver on your battery there, I think it's really important for leaders to recognize the significance of that, not only for their employees' well-being, but for the innovation and productivity and the energy they bring to the workplace. So I've noted a couple of organizations who have made taking vacation time mandatory, and some who even incentivize their employees to take a vacation by offering them funding to help support the vacation. So I think there are a lot of different ways leaders can, recognize their employees' needs and make sure that they do have that time for recovery and some downtime.
Yeah, thank you. And let's actually expand on that. Again, sorry to keep on beating this drum, but this has been the year of elder care for me. What it's meant is sometimes my weekends, I've gone from work to elder care to work to elder care. And what I've learned is weekends are an important respite time as well. And if you don't actually have that, simple things like getting the groceries, just being able to relax and read a book, do a whole lot of nothing doesn't happen enough. And so if we have, going back to that concept of setting boundaries, in that picture we didn't have time to think about, if our work is spilling into day, night, and weekends, we're not getting respite time either. So, as organizations appreciate the importance of vacations, hopefully they also appreciate the importance of evenings and weekends to recover. And again, Jodi's perspective is well taken. Sometimes there's that peak period of work where we do a little bit more. But, in general, ongoing time where we have some recharge time is really important. We're going to get to your story in a second, Jennifer, but this is exactly right. Supporting people to have time for vacations, recover, regenerate, recharge. Any other last thoughts before we go on to a little bit about how you've made this work, Jennifer?
I would just say too that, in our lives, social lives too, we often have this busyness factor,
Yes.
especially when having young or teenage children, where our weekends end up being filled with those activities. And I do think that it's not the topic for today, but I do think there's a big need for boundary setting in those areas, because I feel like there's pressure on the social end that's encroaching on our personal time as well.
Yes, so way back here, back to Jodi's point, this is a skill set that we have to apply on the work side and the life side. For those of you who have listened to these Thursday webinars before, I often jokingly called myself a slacker parent, because I really felt like downtime was really important. So we didn't do a whole lot of things. We hung out a lot as a family, and it took a lot of time just chilling out. And I think in hindsight, probably I intuitively knew overcommitting, overscheduling, getting over involved with sports and other activities just was really hard on family systems and hard on me. And so amen to that. This is a skill we have to apply to both the work side and the life side.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to hear a little bit. I've asked Jennifer in particular to talk a little bit about how she's thought about this in her life, because yes, what we've seen over again, it's not just that we get smart about how to set boundaries at work. We also set up a team at home and get smart about how to set boundaries up at home. You now have teenage children. What are some lessons you've learned around boundary setting with your team at home and making it all work, Jennifer?
Yeah, well, my husband and I have been on this journey together for over 20 years now, and have had, some different configurations, I would say, in the way we approach our work. So when my first daughter was born, she's 19 now, we both ended up scaling back from work for a period of time. I went down to 3 days, a real part-time job, and he compressed his full-time into 4 days, so that there were really only a couple days when we needed childcare coverage. Then I would be home on 2 days, and he would have his daddy day on Friday. And that day became so meaningful to him, and really helped him grow his relationship with our daughter and being the primary carer for her on that day. And I think he looks back so fondly on that time now. And over the years, as our kids grew and we added another child to the family, we've kind of reconsidered and revamped the way that things go. We both now are working full time, but in the more kind of traditional sense, he has a rigid schedule full time, and mine is quite flexible. So I think that allows us to continue to make this work, even though we both have demanding full-time jobs.
Yeah, and probably I'm going to put words in your mouth. Tell me if I'm putting the right words in your mouth. But what happened when on that daddy day, that's really important to emphasize, is on that daddy day, your husband was learning something that you were learning. He was learning that skill set Jodi was talking about. He was learning, I can flex, and if I do it in a way where I also set some boundaries, I can, have this experience and get very proficient at understanding that I can do my job differently in a way where I can be effective at work, but also have time for my family. So it wasn't just you learning these skills, it was both of you learning these skills. And again, back to that ebb and flow of work and life, that means that you both had the skills to kind of manage the ongoing changes, whether that was, a sick day, a snow day, or something bigger that was going to change, just kids getting older, et cetera. Does that feel like a good summary of kind of what you guys learned?
Absolutely, yes. And, year to year, month to month, that can, change, and we try to work together to make sure that, both of our needs and our children's needs and our employers' needs are being met.
Yeah, in fact, here's what we're getting to. You're applying this process that we
Yes.
really feel like we've been learning about. So this is what I was telling everybody listening in today. It seems so simple, but it's actually very profound. In a world that's going fast and faster, most of us don't even get to step number one. But it turns out step number one is actually really important. That's the other thing that was happening on that Daddy Day. Whether he liked it or not, he's hanging out with the baby, he's having some fun time, and whether he likes it or not, it's amazing when you slow down and just kind of be present and have some fun. An idea comes into your head of like, oh, wait a minute, here's a better way to get that work task done because, I actually stepped back, got away from it for a second. Now I can think smarter. Or, hey, the holidays are coming up and we haven't gotten enough, done to be organized for it. It's that kind of slower pace that lets us think smarter. What I also heard in your story is that you guys did a great job of getting clear about what was important to you. Each family's different. What Jennifer said isn't what necessarily you want, listeners, today, but it is the idea of getting clear about what you want outside of work, then helps you get smart about how to make some changes at work. We've seen this over and over again. You start by getting clear. Michelle got clear. I want summers free of work when my kids are little. And then she got smart and courage to ask for those changes. And as Jodi's been saying all along, keep that experimental approach. The point is, you're going to keep on learning as you go, and you're going to get smarter and smarter about how to make it work today and make some adjustments as you get smarter about what needs to happen for tomorrow. So does this look familiar, Jennifer? What do you think?
It does. It definitely does. And one thing that I can reflect upon based on a research study that we conducted here at Boston College on millennials a couple years ago was that the couples who were in the study who had more frequent conversations like this were actually more satisfied with both their home and their work lives. So it has a positive impact on both. This reflecting, this pausing to think about where are we now and where do we want to go, and working together as a couple to figure out the next steps.
Wow. Hey, and I kind of guessed that because we've seen all these amazing couples do this since ThirdPath was founded. We call them shared care couples, where both parents, whether it's mom and mom, dad and dad, mom and dad, doesn't matter, think together about their work and life goals and work together to make sure they have time for their families and time for the things they care about and to be successful at work. And we've really seen the power of shared care. So it's good to know that the research proves the power of shared care.
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting to a point where we're going to talk about some of the challenges. The webinar theme this year is making the impossible possible. If this was so darn easy, a lot more of us would be doing it. And clearly, there's some real big hurdles that get in the way. So that's where we're going to go next, is we're going to have Jodi and Jennifer help us think about why is this so darn hard? Obviously, one big hurdle is a huge fear that if you set boundaries, that you will actually not be able to move ahead at work. And that's what we've been working hard for the last 10 years at ThirdPath, is really trying to show that there is a smarter way to do this, and we can set boundaries and still succeed at work. So that's something that I'm sure we're going to talk about when we talk about the challenges. But there's other things that make it really difficult. I'd argue that one of the biggest things is that, sometimes in order to have set these win-win boundaries, you have to have a kind of scary or difficult conversation, whether that's at home or at work. And I think that in itself probably stops a whole lot of people. I would argue that, people probably think that they're maybe in an unsupportive workplace, and that's just never going to work. And, we're going to talk about that right now, because none of the people, and I get Jodi to talk next about this, none of the people in the article that we were talking to and wrote about were in supportive workplaces. Nevertheless, they went ahead and asked for some change. So, Jodi, what are some of the things that make it really hard for people around this issue? And then I'll ask Jennifer to talk about this too.
Two things come to mind. The first one is that I think people don't even have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So because they're so afraid of what might happen that they never even have the conversation. So if you don't have the conversation, then the answer is, of course, no, because nobody even knows what your needs are.
Yeah.
That's the first block. The second block is I think that there's a lack of role modeling. If you look at what's out there and what's talked about and what's celebrated, it's a very work first mentality. You can see it in the media, you can see it in newspaper articles, you can see it within cultures, organizational cultures, that's what's celebrated. And so people don't realize that there are people within those organizations doing all sorts of things. No, but not very many people write about it. Like we wrote about it in our book, The Orange Line. You talk about it all the time, Jessica, but it's not widespread. And so people don't think that it's possible. They think, oh, I got to do it this way. There's no other way to do it. And I think that lack of role modeling is, frankly, the biggest barrier out there. No, they don't think it's possible.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. I think that's huge. What would you add, Jennifer?
Yeah, I would say, when we see organizations where there are either leaders or line managers who are not supportive, or they're skeptical of offering flexible work, that they really need to look at other people in the organization who are success stories. And some managers can help convince their peers that this truly can work. A lot of it is adversity to change. We've always done it this way, and so this is the way it should continue. And that's why those courageous pioneers stepping forward and speaking up and saying, can we think about this a little bit differently? I believe this could be a win-win for the organization and for myself and my family, and really challenging that status quo.
Yeah. So what you guys are getting at is this part. How do you get the courage up to have that conversation? Most of us don't work in supportive workplaces. The people we write about in the article, did I say this before? Didn't work in supportive workplaces, right? All right. But what they did, and what you're hearing both Jodi and Jennifer talk about, is they went in and they showed why this would be good for the organization and good for them. So for example, Michelle, things slowed down in the summertime anyways. So it was a logical time to actually take some time off. They were only going to have to pay her 80% time. At that point, she was not a partner. She didn't move up to become a partner. So they actually saved some money when they had her work at an 80% schedule. Interestingly, her organization shifted over time, and they became much more supportive of these ideas. And then she became this role model that they rolled out. That's why we met Michelle, is because they were rolling her out as this example of how much they've become this progressive workplace. And now she's really become a champion for helping others do this. But the idea of, you have to look at this from a triple win. We talk about this in the article, meaning it's good for you, good for the work you do, and here's the one we forget about sometimes, good for your colleagues and clients. So you're thinking about how you would do this in a way that would really work. And what we see, if you read Michelle's story, is it ended up actually having a super bonus point where she ended up training people to help do things over the summer. They become much more skilled, and they actually got hired, promoted more quickly because of the way that she trained them and gave them responsibilities. So we're not asking to work poorly when we do this. We're asking to work smarter. Here's where I think people need to start, though. I believe, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, Jodi, afterwards. I believe some of this really starts at home, if possible, and having a courageous conversation at home. Because then, if you still encounter an unsupportive workplace, you have each other's backs to go ahead and make some changes and move on. Some of our progressive leaders actually left an unsupportive workplace. Some even started their own more progressive workplace as a result of their leaving. Any thoughts about the importance of having some conversations about this? Actually, maybe I'll start with Jennifer. How much do you think that played out for you starting the conversation at home. And then I want to ask Jodi for your thoughts afterwards. Jennifer, what do you think?
Yeah, very much so. And I could say, a more recent example in my career was that this director position that I'm in right now opened up 4 years ago. And after talking with my husband, I declined to apply for it at that time. It then again opened up about 2 years ago, and we sat down and, because the kids were older, involved them in the conversation and decided that at that point it was the right time for me to put my hat in the ring for the position. And so I think, having that support from both my husband and then my kids to know that, this was an important opportunity for me that I wanted to take advantage of, and that they would support me as I went for it.
Yeah, wonderful example. Sounds familiar to Michelle's story too. What would you add, Jodi, about this?
I think what ends up happening a lot is when we have children, and even in elder care situations, is that we have a traditional genderized view of who's responsible for the work at home. And it's majority time a woman, although in same-sex marriages, it's one person usually takes that on, because we have this vision that one person should worry about work and one person should worry about home. And the reality is that's not the way it works. So you have to have that conversation first. And I always liken it to what my husband and I came to. My career matters, your career matters, and our family matters. Now, how do we figure it out? Yeah. And by doing that, we change the frame, right? We take these assumptions of it's my responsibility to it's everybody's responsibility. And then all we're figuring out, the negotiation is around the how, because we've taken the default assumption and made it transparent, to use your terminology.
Yeah.
I think that's what you have to do.
Yeah, wonderful. And I want to just one last point, and then we're going to go on to our very last slide. I've been here, folks. I've been at the exhaustion, self-doubt, which then also brings up hopelessness. So when we overdo it, when we try to do too much, it becomes a negative reinforcing cycle. So we are so exhausted that we start doubting, maybe we can't do this, and we become hopeless. Okay, I really don't think this is possible. And that becomes a vicious cycle. And I've been there, folks. When I'm taking on too much, this whole year of elder care really has taken me to that place a couple of times. And luckily, there's a whole lot of people out there who can support you and help you think smarter. Back to number one, the first place you need to do is get some, whether it's a work-life coach or a friend, your sister, somebody help you think out loud, whatever your process is, to stop, reflect, what's really important here, how can I really make some changes so I have time to think and get smarter about what I want to do next. All right, speaking of what we want to do next, we're getting closer and closer to the live Q&A section of our webinar. I'm going to just check with Jodi, and then after her, Jennifer, how can we make the impossible possible? If you have one, last thought or wisdom you want to share, the big point we're talking about is, we really want you to go in there and find some common ground about your goals with your partner at home. We want you to go to your workplace and really advocate for that triple win. Get support. It's really important. That's going to be the place where you get a little time to think. And, really, this is about you doing work in a way that's smart and living life the way you want. Jodi, when you think about this, what advice would you give to people?
I always look at this like I love the "you're worth it" piece, because to me it starts with mindset. The minute we actually reframe it from, oh my God, this is impossible, I can't get it done, to, oh my gosh, it's possible, I can get it done, and I'm worth it. The rest is a how. And you know what? We've been mega trained on figuring out how to problem solve. Everybody knows how to analyze something to death and figure out ways through. We get stuck on the mindset. Change the mindset, and then you can figure it out.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. And when you lose your mindset, get some support to get that.
Yes.
Jennifer, any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, a little bit different than that. It makes me think a lot about traditional gender roles and how important it is for us to create our own roles within our families, and kind of push those traditional gender norms to the side. And I think one key element where organizations can help support in this is providing parental leave for dads as well as moms, because then at day one, both parents are working together, and if it's a gay couple, of course, both dads working together to have parental leave, so that they become competent parents, that they can share the caregiving, that they're both there bonding with their child and having that opportunity. And so I think that really sets the stage for shared caregiving as the child grows, and as life passes, and maybe elder care becomes the focus, that shared caregiving has been the foundation in that couple.
Amen. And what happened, again, back to that daddy day, both parents are learning the skills around flexibility and boundary setting that they keep on applying over and over and over again. Wow, I knew this time was going to fly by. Okay, what happens next is we're going to get to our live Q&A. This is something that those who are tuned in today, you're going to be able to ask Jodi or Jennifer questions. You've got 3 great minds to help you think about this. So those who are attending our webinars this year get to really get some expert advice on the live Q&A. We do not record that part of the call, but it is available to anybody who's participating in the webinar on the second Thursday of the month. So what's coming up next? Some other great topics. Again, we can put that copy of that transformational flexibility article in the mail to you. And, we really want to thank you for joining us. Those who can't stay on, thanks again for participating. Those who are listening in through iTunes or YouTube or SoundCloud, hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. The live Q&A comes next.